Dust rose from ancient roads long before any kingdom recognized the men and women who walked them. Across deserts, mountains, valleys, and foreign territories, a recurring pattern emerged in the biblical record. The individuals later remembered as chosen were rarely embraced by the environments where their journeys began. They stood inside familiar places, yet carried an unfamiliar direction. They lived among their own people, yet sensed a distance that could not be explained by culture, language, family, or circumstance. Their lives unfolded within communities, but their paths steadily moved beyond them. The feeling of being an outsider did not appear at the end of their story. It appeared at the beginning. This pattern stretches across centuries and across the geography of Scripture. It begins in Mesopotamia, moves through Canaan, Egypt, Sinai, Moab, Judea, Galilee, and eventually reaches distant corners of the Roman world. Again and again, those marked for a unique purpose found themselves standing slightly apart from the societies around them. The separation was not always physical at first. Often it appeared as an invisible tension between present surroundings and future destinations. Abraham experienced this tension before the first step of his great migration. In the prosperous region associated with Ur, life offered familiarity, structure, and belonging. Yet the narrative immediately points beyond that landscape. His journey was defined not by remaining but by departing. The chosen man became a traveler. His identity became connected to movement. The map of his life expanded through unfamiliar territories, temporary settlements, and uncertain horizons. He moved through Canaan as a resident without ownership, living among peoples whose cities, customs, and boundaries surrounded him. Even while carrying promises of future inheritance, he occupied the position of an outsider in the land that would later become central to his descendants. The same pattern continued through Isaac and Jacob. Their lives unfolded amid migration, negotiations, regional conflicts, and constant movement between locations. The promised family possessed a future tied to the land, yet generation after generation experienced the reality of not fully belonging. Jacob's story intensified this dynamic. Conflict forced him away from home. Years passed in foreign territory. He built a family while living under another authority. Then he returned, only to face new uncertainties. His life became a sequence of departures and arrivals, each location serving as a temporary stage in a larger historical movement. By the time the descendants of Jacob entered Egypt, the theme had become unmistakable. They lived in Goshen, geographically present within Egypt, but socially distinct from Egyptian society. Their location reflected their condition. They were inside the nation without being part of its identity. Generations later, that separation contributed to suspicion, oppression, and eventual slavery. The chosen people multiplied, but increasing numbers did not eliminate the sensation of being outsiders. In many ways, it intensified it. Geography reinforced the distinction. Culture reinforced the distinction. History reinforced the distinction. Then came the Exodus, one of the largest movements recorded in Scripture. The wilderness between Egypt and Canaan became more than a route. It became a landscape that revealed a profound truth. The chosen often occupy transitional spaces. They live between what was and what will be. The wilderness represented neither Egypt nor the Promised Land. It was a territory of passage. The people crossing it belonged fully to neither side. Behind them stood a world they could not return to. Ahead of them stood a destination not yet reached. The result was a collective experience of feeling like outsiders. They were no longer Egyptians. They were not yet settled inhabitants of Canaan. Their identity was being formed during movement itself. Across deserts and mountain ranges, through encampments and temporary settlements, they learned that chosen journeys frequently unfold in places where certainty disappears and belonging feels incomplete. Moses embodied this reality perhaps more dramatically than anyone. His life crossed multiple worlds without fully settling into any of them. Born among Hebrews, raised within Egyptian power, exiled into Midian, and later called back to confront Pharaoh, he continually stood between identities. In Egypt, he was connected to Hebrew origins, yet raised in royal surroundings. In Midian, he established a life yet remained marked by a different past. During the Exodus, he led a people who often misunderstood him while confronting rulers who rejected him. The geography of Moses' life reflects the geography of many chosen figures. He moved across borders, crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and entered territories where he never fully belonged. Yet those very transitions shaped his role in history. The same pattern appears in the lives of the prophets. Their ministries often placed them at odds with the societies they served. Isaiah spoke within Jerusalem, but delivered messages many resisted. Jeremiah walked the streets of the capital, yet carried warnings that isolated him from popular opinion. Ezekiel lived among exiles beside foreign rivers. Daniel served within imperial governments while maintaining a distinct identity. Their locations varied, but the underlying experience remained remarkably consistent. They stood within nations while carrying perspectives that separated them from prevailing assumptions. Their words frequently sounded unfamiliar because their vision extended beyond the immediate concerns of those around them. As a result, they often occupied the position of outsiders, even when surrounded by their own people. The historical sequence continues into the period after exile. Returning communities faced a surprising reality. Home no longer felt entirely like home. Generations had passed. Political circumstances had changed. Cities required rebuilding. Institutions needed restoration. The return was real, yet complete belonging remained elusive. The chosen community existed between memory and future fulfillment. They carried ancient promises while confronting present uncertainty. This tension became part of their historical identity. By the time the narrative reaches the 1st century, the pattern appears again with extraordinary clarity. Jesus emerged from Galilee, a region viewed differently from the religious center of Jerusalem. His ministry unfolded across villages, lake shores, hillsides, wilderness areas, and roads connecting towns. Movement defined the narrative. Crowds gathered, yet misunderstandings persisted. Communities welcomed him temporarily, then questioned him. Authorities observed him, debated him, and opposed him. Even those closest to him struggled to understand the full scope of his mission. The geography of the Gospel accounts reinforces the theme. Rarely does the story remain fixed in one place for long. Journeys dominate the narrative. Crossings occur repeatedly. Mountains, deserts, villages, and cities become stages in a continually unfolding movement. The chosen one walks through the world while remaining distinct from its expectations. His path reveals a pattern already visible throughout earlier generations. Those marked by divine purpose frequently experience distance from the assumptions surrounding them. The disciples followed a similar trajectory. Fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary individuals left familiar environments and entered an unfolding journey that transformed their relationship with the world around them. Their lives became defined by movement. Roads connected one teaching location to another. Boats crossed the Sea of Galilee. Paths led toward Jerusalem. After the resurrection, the geographical scope expanded dramatically. Missions carried them across provinces, cities, islands, and trade routes. The book of Acts reads almost like a historical map in motion. Jerusalem connects to Judea. Judea connects to Samaria. Samaria connects to distant regions beyond traditional boundaries. With each expansion came a renewed experience of being outsiders. New territories required adaptation. New audiences required courage. New challenges emerged at every stage. Yet the movement continued. The life of Paul illustrates this progression with exceptional clarity. Few figures traveled more extensively across the biblical world. From Damascus to Antioch, from Cyprus to Asia Minor, from Greece toward Rome, his journeys crossed immense distances. Everywhere he went, he entered environments where he initially stood as an outsider. New cities brought unfamiliar customs, political structures, and social expectations. Yet those circumstances became essential parts of the mission itself. The feeling of not fully belonging often accompanied the advance of the journey. Historical movement and personal purpose remained intertwined. Looking across the entire biblical timeline, a remarkable pattern emerges. Chosen individuals repeatedly find themselves positioned at intersections rather than destinations. They stand between past and future, between familiar and unfamiliar, between comfort and calling. Geography repeatedly mirrors this condition. Deserts, borderlands, roads, exile locations, temporary settlements, and foreign territories dominate the narrative landscape. The chosen are not primarily associated with permanence. They are associated with movement. Their stories unfold through transitions. Their identities are refined through journeys. Their sense of being outsiders often reflects the reality that their lives are oriented toward destinations not yet reached. This pattern explains why the biblical record contains so many migrations, departures, crossings, and relocations. The experience is larger than individual circumstances. It becomes a recurring historical rhythm woven throughout Scripture. The chosen often perceive realities beyond immediate surroundings. Their attention stretches toward horizons others may not yet see. As a result, they can feel disconnected from prevailing expectations. They occupy present locations while moving toward future purposes. The distance between those two realities creates tension. Throughout biblical history, that tension appears not as an accident but as a recurring feature of significant journeys. The outsider experience emerges because the path itself requires movement beyond familiar boundaries. The road from Ur to Canaan, from Egypt to Sinai, from Babylon to Jerusalem, from Galilee to the nations, reveals a consistent progression. History advances through people willing to walk beyond what is known. Their lives demonstrate that feeling like an outsider is often connected to standing within a transition larger than oneself. Across centuries of recorded events, deserts and roads, kingdoms and empires, mountains and valleys, the pattern remains visible. The chosen are frequently remembered not because they fit perfectly into their surroundings, but because they continued moving through them toward something greater that history had not yet fully revealed. Empires rose and fell around them, borders shifted, dynasties appeared and disappeared, yet the recurring pattern remained remarkably unchanged. The chosen often found themselves moving through history without fully merging into the environment surrounding them. Their lives unfolded along the edges of major events, participating in them while simultaneously remaining distinct from them. This separation was not always dramatic. Sometimes it appeared quietly, hidden within ordinary circumstances. A shepherd walked alone through remote hills while cities expanded beyond the horizon. A young exile studied foreign languages while remembering a distant homeland. A traveler crossed unfamiliar roads, carrying a message few initially understood. The outsider experience frequently emerged long before the larger significance of a person's journey became visible. Looking carefully across the chronology of Scripture, one notices that periods of preparation often occurred in locations far removed from public recognition. Joseph's story demonstrates this pattern with extraordinary clarity. His journey began within a family, but quickly moved into territories where belonging became increasingly difficult to find. Sold into Egypt, separated from everything familiar, he entered a civilization with different customs, language, and power structures. The distance between his past and present was immense. Geographically, culturally, and socially, he became an outsider. Yet the very environment that highlighted his separation also became the setting where his future role developed. The prison that confined him and the palace that later elevated him were both located within a foreign land. His life reveals a recurring historical reality. The chosen are often prepared in places where they cannot rely on familiarity. They learn to navigate uncertainty because their future responsibilities require perspectives larger than a single environment can provide. Similar themes appear throughout the era of the Judges. Israel repeatedly struggled with identity, direction, and stability. During this period, many leaders emerged from unexpected locations. Gideon was not positioned at the center of national influence. He appeared in a time of fear and fragmentation. David began his journey not within royal courts, but among pastures and sheepfolds. His early years unfolded in relative obscurity, far from the institutions that shaped public life. Even after his rise became visible, he spent long periods moving through wilderness regions, caves, and isolated strongholds. Maps of David's life reveal constant movement. Bethlehem, the valley of Elah, the wilderness of Judah, the caves of Adullam, the territories surrounding Ziph and En-Gedi, all became stages in a journey defined by transition. The future king frequently occupied spaces outside established power structures, Before sitting on a throne, he learned survival in landscapes where belonging seemed uncertain. Those years shaped the perspective required for later leadership. The outsider season became part of the preparation process. Elijah's ministry illustrates the pattern through geography itself. During periods of crisis, his path led away from population centers and toward remote locations. Streams hidden in isolated regions, mountain ranges far from royal authority, and wilderness routes became recurring settings in his story. The narrative repeatedly moves him outside conventional structures. While kingdoms debated policy and power, the prophet traveled through territories where dependence on ordinary systems became impossible. The chosen figure often appeared physically separated from society because the historical moment required a different perspective. Elisha inherited a similar trajectory. His movements connected villages, agricultural regions, rivers, and cities, yet he consistently occupied a position that remained distinct from the dominant assumptions of his age. Throughout the prophetic era, this dynamic continued. The prophet stood close enough to observe society, yet distant enough to perceive its direction differently. Their role required both proximity and separation. Too much immersion would obscure their perspective. Too much isolation would remove them from the historical events they were called to address. As a result, they frequently occupied a middle ground. They belonged and did not belong simultaneously. This tension became one of the defining characteristics of their experience. Exile intensified the pattern on a national scale. Entire communities suddenly found themselves living in foreign territory. The rivers of Babylon became symbols of displacement. Jerusalem existed in memory, while daily life unfolded elsewhere. The people carried traditions, stories, and expectations connected to one location while residing in another. This geographical disconnection created a profound historical experience. They were present yet distant, active yet separated, surviving within an empire while remembering a homeland. The outsider condition became a collective reality, rather than merely an individual one. Yet even during exile, important developments occurred. Institutions adapted, communities reorganized, identity deepened. The very circumstances that emphasized separation also preserved essential elements of the nation's future. When return eventually became possible, the experience of displacement had transformed the people in significant ways. The outsider journey had not destroyed them, it had refined them. By the time of the Second Temple period, generations carried memories shaped by migration, conquest, restoration, and foreign influence. The land remained significant, yet political realities continued to remind many that complete stability had not been achieved. This historical backdrop provides important context for understanding the atmosphere into which Jesus entered. Roads connected regions influenced by multiple cultures. Roman authority shaped daily life. Trade routes linked distant territories. Religious expectations intensified as people anticipated future developments. Within this complex environment, Jesus moved from place to place, often teaching outside formal centers of power. Hillsides, lake shores, roads, and villages became primary settings. The geography itself reinforces the theme. Significant moments occurred not only in cities, but also in transitional spaces. Wilderness regions played important roles. Mountains served as locations of revelation. Crossings from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other marked shifts in audience and circumstance. The narrative continually advances through movement. The outsider theme becomes visible not merely through reactions to Jesus, but through the structure of the journey itself. He moved among communities while consistently pointing beyond immediate expectations. The disciples experienced this transformation firsthand. Their former identities remained part of their history, yet their future increasingly depended upon unfamiliar directions. Fishing communities gave way to regional journeys. Familiar routines gave way to expanding responsibilities. Every road introduced new challenges. Every destination created new transitions. The process gradually reshaped how they understood themselves and the world around them. Their experience reveals another dimension of the outsider pattern. Sometimes separation emerges not because a person leaves familiar surroundings immediately, but because personal transformation begins changing how those surroundings are perceived. The same village can feel different when a new purpose emerges. The same environment can seem unfamiliar when a larger horizon becomes visible. After the resurrection, the geographical expansion of the biblical narrative accelerated dramatically. The movement from Jerusalem outward became one of the defining developments of early Christian history. Roads that once served commerce now carried messengers. Maritime routes connected distant communities. Major cities became hubs within a growing network of communication and travel. Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Rome entered the narrative sequence. Each location introduced new cultural realities. Each destination required adaptation. The chosen were no longer associated primarily with one territory. Their movement extended across regions, languages, and social structures. The outsider experience accompanied this expansion. Entering unfamiliar cities meant learning unfamiliar customs. Communicating across cultural boundaries required flexibility and endurance. Yet these very challenges allowed the message to travel farther than would otherwise have been possible. The life of Paul provides perhaps the most extensive example of this historical movement. His journeys stretched across vast portions of the Mediterranean world. Maps tracing his travels reveal continuous progression. Cities connect through roads, ports, and sea routes. Each destination represents another encounter with unfamiliar circumstances. Sometimes he was welcomed. Sometimes he faced opposition. Sometimes communities responded enthusiastically. Other times resistance emerged immediately, yet the pattern remained consistent. Progress often occurred through movement into environments where he initially stood as an outsider. The road itself became part of the mission. Looking across the broader biblical timeline, a striking observation emerges. Many of the most significant developments occurred during periods of transition rather than stability. Important revelations happened during journeys. Major turning points occurred during migrations. Defining moments unfolded in wilderness regions, exile communities, temporary settlements, and foreign territories. History advanced through movement. The chosen frequently occupied these transitional spaces because their role involved helping carry events from one stage into another. They stood between eras. They connected generations. They participated in the movement from promise toward fulfillment. This broader perspective helps explain why the outsider experience appears so frequently throughout Scripture. It is connected to historical momentum. Those moving toward future destinations often perceive realities not yet visible to those focused entirely on present circumstances. The resulting distance can create a sense of separation. Yet within the biblical narrative, that separation often serves a larger purpose. It allows individuals and communities to maintain perspective during periods of change. It preserves vision when circumstances remain uncertain. It creates room for development that might not occur within environments defined solely by familiarity. Across deserts, kingdoms, rivers, mountains, roads, and seas, the chosen repeatedly walked paths that distinguished them from their surroundings. Their journeys reveal that feeling like an outsider has often accompanied moments when history itself was moving toward a new chapter. The road ahead remained unseen, but the movement continued. One generation passed its experiences to the next. One location connected to another. One era opened the way for what followed. Through it all, the chosen frequently occupied the space between what existed and what was still emerging, carrying forward a story that unfolded across centuries and across the vast geography of the biblical world. The final pages of the biblical narrative do not abandon the pattern, they bring it into sharper focus. After centuries of migrations, exiles, wilderness journeys, conquests, returns, and missionary expansions, a consistent thread can be traced from beginning to end. The chosen repeatedly move through landscapes that are temporary, while being guided toward realities that endure. This historical rhythm explains why so many pivotal events occur on roads rather than in palaces, in deserts rather than capitals, in foreign territories rather than familiar surroundings. The story advances because individuals and communities continue forward even when complete belonging remains out of reach. The sensation of being an outsider is woven into that movement. It appears not as an isolated experience, but as a recurring feature of journeys that stretch across generations. The earliest travelers of Scripture experienced it. The prophets experienced it. The exiles experienced it. The disciples experienced it. The messengers who carried the story into distant regions experienced it. Each lived within a specific historical context, yet all participated in a broader pattern that transcended their individual circumstances. When viewed across the full timeline, the geography of Scripture reveals something remarkable. Very few of its defining figures spend their lives entirely settled. Abraham moves from Mesopotamia toward Canaan. Jacob travels between regions and eventually into Egypt. Moses crosses deserts and mountains. Joshua leads a people through transition into a new land. Ruth leaves one nation for another. David moves through wilderness territories before reaching Jerusalem. Elijah travels through isolated regions. Ezekiel ministers in exile. Daniel serves in a foreign empire. Jesus journeys throughout Galilee, Samaria, Judea, and beyond. The apostles carry their mission across the Mediterranean world. Again and again, movement dominates the narrative. The chosen are frequently portrayed not as permanent residents of a single moment, but as travelers, participating in a larger unfolding story. This historical progression creates a unique perspective. Those constantly moving from one stage to another rarely define themselves solely by present circumstances. Their attention remains fixed on destinations beyond immediate horizons. They learn to navigate uncertainty because uncertainty becomes part of the journey itself. They become familiar with transition because transition repeatedly shapes their experience. In this sense, the outsider condition often emerges from living with a broader horizon than the surrounding environment. A village focuses on local concerns. A kingdom focuses on immediate stability. An empire focuses on maintaining power. Yet many biblical figures operate according to trajectories that extend far beyond those boundaries. Their lives become connected to developments still unfolding. Their decisions carry implications reaching into future generations. As a result, their perspective frequently differs from that of those around them. History later recognizes their significance, but during their journeys, they often appear out of step with prevailing expectations. The Book of Acts illustrates this dynamic on a vast geographical scale. What began in Jerusalem expanded steadily outward. Roads linked regions, ships crossed seas. Communities formed in cities separated by enormous distances. Communication required effort, endurance, and persistence. The chosen entered environments where they possessed no established influence, no inherited position, and no guarantee of acceptance. Yet these circumstances became essential to the expansion of the story. Every unfamiliar destination represented both a challenge and an opportunity. Every new territory required courage. Every crossing into unknown surroundings reinforced the reality that the journey extended beyond familiar borders. The outsider experience accompanied growth because growth itself required movement into places where certainty did not exist. This theme reaches beyond individual biographies and becomes part of the larger biblical vision of history. Scripture consistently portrays human life as movement through time. Generations inherit promises, responsibilities, and memories from those who came before. They then carry those realities forward into the future. The chosen frequently stand at crucial transition points within this process. They serve as bridges connecting one chapter to another. Abraham connects origins to promise. Moses connects slavery to freedom. Joshua connects wilderness to settlement. David connects tribal confederation to monarchy. The prophets connect warning to restoration. The apostles connect local beginnings to global expansion. In each case, the chosen occupy spaces between established realities and emerging possibilities. That position naturally produces tension. It creates seasons where belonging feels incomplete because the story itself remains unfinished. The final sections of Scripture preserve this perspective. The imagery of pilgrimage, anticipation, and future fulfillment remains prominent. The narrative continually points beyond immediate circumstances toward larger conclusions still approaching. This forward-looking orientation reinforces a central observation visible throughout biblical history. The chosen are often defined less by where they currently stand than by where the journey is leading. Their identity develops through movement, toward destinations not yet fully visible. Consequently, they may appear unusual within environments focused exclusively on the present. Their lives follow a different rhythm. Their priorities reflect a broader timeline. Their actions often make sense only when viewed within the larger historical sequence. Geography repeatedly reinforces this lesson. Mountains symbolize perspective, gained above immediate surroundings. Deserts symbolize preparation beyond conventional systems. Rivers symbolize crossings from one stage into another. Roads symbolize progression. Wilderness regions symbolize transformation. Exile territories symbolize refinement. Cities symbolize opportunity and challenge. Together, these locations create a map of continual movement. The chosen pass through each environment without allowing any single stage to become the final definition of their identity. They are shaped by locations, yet never entirely confined by them. They are influenced by historical moments, yet their journeys consistently point beyond those moments toward future developments. Looking back across the entire biblical record, it becomes clear that many of the individuals later celebrated for their significance spent substantial portions of their lives misunderstood, displaced, overlooked, or separated from prevailing expectations. History remembers the outcomes. The narratives preserve the process. The process often involved years spent in places where belonging seemed uncertain. Joseph spent years in Egypt before his role became visible. Moses spent decades in Midian before returning to Egypt. David spent years in wilderness regions before becoming king. Daniel served through changing empires while remaining distinct from each of them. Paul traveled extensively through territories where he began as a stranger. The pattern repeats with remarkable consistency. The outsider experience frequently precedes major historical developments. It creates conditions where perspective broadens, endurance strengthens, and dependence upon familiar structures decreases. The biblical narrative therefore presents outsider status not as a meaningless condition, but as a recurring context in which important transitions occur. Throughout centuries of recorded history, chosen individuals often stood at the edges of established systems because their role involved helping carry events beyond those systems. They occupied crossroads rather than destinations. They participated in transformation rather than permanence. They moved through environments that shaped them while continuing toward horizons not yet reached. This perspective transforms how the entire narrative can be viewed. Scripture becomes a vast historical journey, stretching from ancient Mesopotamia to the cities of the Roman world. Along that journey, roads connect generations, deserts prepare leaders, exile preserves identity, mountains reveal perspective, seas enable expansion. Kingdoms rise and fall, empires appear and disappear, yet through every transition, the chosen continue forward. Their stories reveal that feeling like an outsider often accompanies movement through periods of profound historical change. They belong to the journey itself. Their lives are connected to destinations still unfolding. Their significance emerges not because they perfectly fit their surroundings, but because they remain faithful to the path before them as history advances from one chapter to the next. Across centuries, continents, languages, and civilizations, the pattern remains unmistakable. The chosen walk through the world while carrying awareness of realities extending beyond it. They live within history, while participating in something larger than any single moment. Their journeys cross deserts and kingdoms, rivers and mountains, villages and empires. Their paths reveal a story defined not by isolation alone, but by movement, progression, and purpose. The outsider experience becomes part of a greater narrative, one that unfolds across the full landscape of Scripture, connecting distant generations through a continuous historical journey that never truly stands still. From the first migration recorded in Genesis to the final visions that close the biblical account, the chosen remain travelers, moving toward horizons that continue drawing the story forward, reminding every generation that some of history's most significant journeys begin in places where belonging feels uncertain and continue through landscapes where the next destination has not yet fully appeared.